in the article, I make the case that at least some parts of the Quran, which I consider to be the oldest, first of all, do not use the term mushrikun. And they don't even use the verb related to the root. They don't talk about associating. They just talk against some opponents. But so from this, how to say, corpus of text within the Quran, this Quran within the Quran, we can find an image, a representation of these opponents of the Quran's prophet that actually matches the representation of the mushrikun in the tradition. So it's a really, I think, a bit more complicated, the question, and it's related also to how we use the Quran. That is, when we try to write history and when we try to extrapolate elements from the Quran to reconstruct the religious and social background of the text. So I think that a very important notion that we need to keep in mind is that of, as I mentioned, textual stratification, and that the text may contain different layers. And we should keep in mind that not every layer might refer to the context described in the tradition. Otherwise said, there might be passages in the Quran, entire pericopes, even entire surahs, if you want, that do not come from this area between Mecca and Medina.
Okay.
They might come from a different context.
Yeah, so this might be, to some of our viewers, might be like completely new, this idea of stratification. I mean, even to people maybe trained in Quranic studies, students doing Islamic studies or something like that. I mean, we just hear the sort of the standard, or let's call it the master narrative, both from the tradition and from, you know, Western Orientalists, is that, yeah, there are elements of the Quran from different periods of Muhammad's life, but we can't speak of stratification in the sense of a text that is the product of an editing process where material of different origin was redacted together, right? Yes. So, yeah, I just want to push you a little bit more on that, and we'll get into your specific proposal of a corpus of text within the Quran, or a subcorpus of text within the Quran, in just a second. But yeah, I mean, what a reaction when you speak about this to people in Quranic studies, that, you know, we shouldn't just follow the master narrative. We should have maybe a more granular reading of the text, or more attentive, at least an eye that is attentive to the possibility of different subcorpora or subcorpuses, which, you know, represent different layers in the Quran. Do people think that this is kind of academic heresy, or yeah, what a reaction?
Well, it's very, I mean, it's a very curious field, because I mean, I was always impressed by the lack of interest that scholars in Quranic studies showed for the idea that maybe we are not dealing with the phenomenon of single authorship. Mm-hmm. Otherwise said, the single authorship is given for granted in many cases, and even when scholars seem to be open to the possibility that there is not only one author, there is always the assumption that it comes from a single community, okay, in a very well-defined context, okay? So maybe some scholars say, okay, this might come from people around Muhammad, but there is also always this idea that there is some kind of a concentration of the text in a very specific setting. And I think that this lack of interest for exploring other scenarios, more dynamic scenarios in which we have a text that evolves together with the community, and then a text coming from different contexts that come to mingle together in the moment of the expansion of the community. This idea is not even considered very often. Okay, so it's a bit like as the debate is polarized. Also, if you want, this idea of the single authorship is reflected also in the two most common scenarios that the scholars refer to explain the genesis of the Quran. So there is, if we want to go back to the example of Christianity, why there is such a strong Christian presence in the Quran, this has been mostly explained in two ways. The first way was to drag the late antique world within the Hijaz, so bringing the limits of the late antique worlds a bit more close to the original cradle of the community.
Further to the south from
exactly.
Palestine or Syria down to the Hijaz. Yeah.
Exactly. So imagining the Hijaz as a more as area more closely connected to these Christian communities in the Syria, Palestine, northern Mesopotamia, and so on. And the second hypothesis is the famous idea that the Quran emerged elsewhere. Okay. And usually this elsewhere is set into the context of Mesopotamia. It's, it's the famous Wansberg's hypothesis.
Or more recently, just to add another wrinkle to the theory, there's been some talk around the work of someone named Dan Gibson. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes.
Geography, arguing that Mecca is actually Petra, and yeah.
Exactly. So, but there is always this idea that the entire corpus must originate from a very specific context. Okay, and so this is somehow related also to the idea of the single author. Okay, because we want to imagine that the text goes back to either a single person or a very specific group of people. The only recent attempt, which I found interesting, even if I don't agree, to explore a more dynamic setting, has been done by one Cole, who thought that Muhammad was an itinerary prophet who used to address, to change his preaching, to adapt his preaching to different communities. But it's also, it's interesting because Cole indeed considers that the Quran might refer to different contexts. But I don't agree with him because there is always the assumption that everything should go back to Muhammad. So it's a bit, but I find it interesting, the hypothesis, because at least it explores this possibility that we don't have a single context of origin.
Okay, yeah. So, and in the article you outline possibilities that during the conquest, so perhaps after the life of Muhammad, there's material which may be more robustly Christian material, which could have been integrated into the corpus. Yeah,
this is my idea. This is my idea because I mean I'm really not convinced. I am very skeptical about a substantial Christian presence in the Hijaz. I mean, there are several factors that make me think otherwise. First of all, I already mentioned the absence of any kind of clear evidence but also, there is the traditional sources have no problem in mentioning the presence of a Jewish community in Medina. So one cannot even make the case that they are trying to erase monotheistic culture to make a stronger case for the revelation coming from heaven. So
yeah, so this is really interesting and provocative. I mean, just to comment from another field, I mean, there's nothing really radical about this. I mean, if you take biblical studies, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, by way of comparison, I mean, these sorts of ideas are common. I mean, in the 19th century, people were speaking about the documentary hypothesis of the four sources of the Pentateuch, which differ between the Yahweh source, I mean, emerging in something like 11th to 10th century BC or BCE, and then the priestly source from the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC or BCE. I mean, yeah, so these things go on, obviously, with theories of the synoptic formation of the synoptic gospels. All of these ideas, or similar methods, are used. And then, I mean, there's the point of just generally thinking about what this means to have maybe original oral composition, maybe, not sure if you agree with that. So the very earliest stages of development, how that moves to how the oral composition could play a role, and then potentially the text could circulate orally before it's written in different contexts. But because we don't have too much time, I wanted to turn to your proposal in this argument. So think of the first part of the title where we have the Qur'ans with an S plural for a particular subcorpus. And you list a whole number of surahs, most of which are short and towards the end of the Quranic text as we have it now. But I mean, a good deal, I didn't count, but maybe between 20 and 30, something like that. Does that sound right?
I didn't count either.
Okay. But a good deal, something like that. Yeah, and but you're very precise in identifying commonalities between these surahs. I mean, anyone who's interested in getting the precise list, I won't read it off here. Just go to Professor Tesei's article on his academia site, The Qur'ans in Context, from Journal Asiatique. But he notes that, or you note the features that are common to all of these surahs, which is the use of idha, like when or if at the opening, and then formulas or formulae such as wama adraka, what has made you known, references to companions of the right, companions of the left. These short surahs are generally, or I think completely, not just generally, missing the root sheen ra kaf, which has to do with association. I think they're also completely missing the references to ar-Rahman, that is God with the divine name, the Merciful, or to references to a prophet as a Nabi, cognate with Hebrew Navi, meaning prophet. Also that they have short verses and many hapexes. So yeah, I mean, what does this mean? What's the importance of identifying this group of texts that all share these features? How does it relate to traditional ideas about, what Pedro Nundika said? We just have early Meccan, middle Meccan, late Meccan. Why is what you've observed something different from that?
Okay, so first of all, I want to add another thing that you mentioned the stylistic commonalities, the stylistic features of this corpus of surahs, which are very peculiar, because I mean the style of these surahs is very different from the style of other parts of the Quran. But what is also important is that the contents of the surah, these surahs are sometimes very coherent among the corpus, but inconsistent with other parts of the Quran. And what is really interesting is that the picture that emerges from these surahs actually matches the picture of the background, societal background of Muhammad's life. So the most clear example is perhaps the complete lack of Christian figures. We have references to biblical prophets, but not to, would say, 100% Christian figures.
So not to Jesus or Mary, John the Baptist.
Exactly. And we have other cases like this, but it's not only the style that appears to be coherent across the source, it's also, you know, the...
Yeah, so that's very important because it is sort of, you know, now we have with our technology two-source authentication. So it's something like that, right? Because you have the stylistic matching the actual text or content.
Yes. So, and I mean, the readers familiar with Quranic studies, when they will, if they will be curious and go read the article and check which surahs these surahs are, will probably be disappointed, saying, yeah, but this is the first Meccan period, everybody knows. So, and this is because in the chronology of the Quran, elaborated first by the Islamic tradition, then refined by Western scholars, there were already attempts to select this corpus of surahs. The difference is that this was set into a chronological framework. Okay, I mean, it's not so surprising that we all came to the same conclusions, because chronology is also based on the study of the style of the Quran.
Right.
And
that's a really important point. Yeah.
And the coherence of this corpus of surahs I selected is so evident and so, how to say, the style is so different from the rest of the Quran that this corpus of surahs has constantly been considered to be something apart, usually the earliest layer of the Quran.
So, I mean, does this mean that you somehow worked with the same observations that maybe Suyuti and Zarkashi and then Gustav Weil and Theo de Noordelijke made, Roger Blacher afterwards, but without the presuppositions? I've just pulled up the article here. So some of the surahs are 52, 53, 56, 69, 70, 74, 75, 77, 78, 79. And as you know, I mean, most of them do date to the what Noordelijke classifies as first Meccan. But I mean, for Noordelijke, everything should be seen. I mean, his book is called The History of the Quran. So everything should be seen within this history, where Muhammad is thinking a certain way at the beginning and then changes gradually in Mecca and then finally in Medina. And so by taking away those presuppositions of single authorship and a chronological basis or foundation for reading the surahs, everything changes, basically. I mean, now you can see the possibility that what you have is not just development over time, but maybe stratification or different contexts.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that when I started this analysis of this corpus of surahs, I didn't refer to previous studies by either Quranic commentators or Western scholars. So I was just working on the text and trying to identify common stylistic traits. And then when I selected this corpus of surahs, I just said, okay, this matches sometimes not entirely, but grosso modo it matches the work of others. As myself, why? And the question is that because there is no other possible outcome if you work on the style. It is so evident that this is something, a group apart. Then you can read it in different ways. To me, it's...
Right. So the evidence is clear, and Nozdeko is really noticing something. It's just what you do with the evidence, that sort of next step, and you can diverge dramatically. Well,
I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry, I want to add something. For instance, there is this famous study by Sadeghi about the chronology of the Quran, and also Sadeghi recognizes that if you put this corpus of surahs in the framework of the idea of a chronological development, then I don't remember exactly the word he uses, but he says that there was some kind of strong stylistic break or something like that at the beginning of Muhammad's prophetic career. So a radical change in the way the prophet preached to his community. So if you want to keep the idea of a chronological development, I mean, I have another idea. I mean, maybe it's easier if I just, it's not very nice to quote myself, but I think if I just read the passage from the article, it's gonna be clearer. So in the article I say, let us now try to situate our corpus of surahs in the framework of a chronological development of Muhammad's preaching, and to consider them as the first literary expressions of his religious message. From such a perspective, it follows that the prophet's modus communicandi changed dramatically as his prophetic career unfolded. Some common terms and formulaic elements were abandoned and replaced by others. The original lexical wealth and variety gave way to a standardized vocabulary. The rhyme-prose structure was abandoned. The initial apocalyptic fervor was mitigated. The representation of the social and cultural background and the nature of opposition to the new message also changed. So if we take this corpus and we consider this, no, this is only the first, reflects only the first period of Muhammad's life, then it changed. We have to admit that the change was enormous. Not only in the way the prophet decided to communicate his message, but also in the social environment, okay? All of a sudden we see Christians appearing, also the way in which other opponents are described change. We start hearing about mushrikun, the way the Jews are described also changes. So it's really a dramatic shift. And to me, it really takes a lot of faith, a leap of faith, to believe that all these might have happened.
In one context, but why not instead think of more than one context?
Exactly. This is especially since the image that emerges from this corpus matches the representation of the environment of Muhammad's preaching in the tradition.
Okay, interesting.